Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, October the 20th, 2025. Today there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars in Scorpio, and in this video I want to look at this conjunction in some detail. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Monday, October the 20th. And here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time on Monday. And you can see the conjunction between Mercury and Mars here. Mercury and Mars at around sort of 19 Scorpio. And this conjunction is quite close to true black moon Lilith, so that might also be of some significance. Now, if we're thinking about the Mercury-Mars conjunction, well, it has been building up for some time. And when you think about a Mercury-Mars conjunction, you think about perhaps agitation. There is a lot to say, and what we do have to say could be said in an angry way. I mean, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Mercury is the planet of communication. You put it next to Mars, which is quite an aggressive influence, and there is your anger, saying words with haste and perhaps urgency. And there is something quite nervous about the Mercury-Mars conjunction. So that's one thing going on today. We also have a couple of quintiles, and so you can see that Pluto is at 1 degree Aquarius. So Pluto is quintile the Mercury-Mars conjunction, and this does mean that the Mercury-Mars conjunction is given added intensity. So when you throw Pluto into the equation, it's about what we are trying to create. There can be real willpower here. We want to get our message across. We want people to understand, or perhaps it's other people that want us to understand. So there is a lot of verbal anger, and you might associate the word propaganda with this quintile. Everyone has an agenda. People have agendas. Governments have agendas. It can be a time where everyone is sort of vying for control of the narrative. And as far as the moon is concerned, well, this is a chart set for New York, and it sort of kind of depends where you are. But the moon is in Libra. It's sort of separating from a conjunction to Venus, and it's moving towards a new moon. So that's a reminder that tomorrow we have a new moon at 28 degrees Libra. So I think that many of us are going to be feeling this new moon. The moon is coming to the end of something. The lunar cycle is drawing to a close. Perhaps it's a time to be sort of wrapping things up, not a time to be starting anything new, especially as the moon is in the Virgo-Combuster. So the moon is at 18 degrees Libra, so that means that approximately New York time, about 5, 6 in the morning off the top of my head, the moon went into the Virgo-Combuster. So that would be that's later if you're in if you're in Europe, maybe sort of at noon. I don't know. I haven't checked the exact times, or late this evening if you're in Australia, or late in the evening if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But the moon is moving into the Virgo-Combuster just before the full moon, just before the new moon, and that could create a certain amount of instability. The Virgo-Combuster, that part of the sky between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio, can be quite difficult. Things don't necessarily go to plan, and now we've got a new moon coming up, and the fact that it's last quarter moon. It's not last quarter moon. It's right at the end, the very end. There's hardly anything left of the lunar cycle, and so that may say something about today. When you throw in Mercury conjunct Mars, yeah, I think for many of us, it could be quite a concentrated and perhaps rather difficult day. The moon, as I've said, doesn't really make any mitigating aspects. Okay, perhaps the moon conjunct Venus at the beginning of the day, but I wouldn't read too much into it. And I think it's perhaps more important that the moon is kind of getting a bit burnt out as it approaches the conjunction of the sun. So it is a new week. It is a new week, but it is also an ending, because the new moon is not until tomorrow. So if we look at the situation from a viewpoint of Sydney, Australia, the moon is earlier in the sign. If you are in Sydney, Australia, or you're in New Zealand, then that Moon-Venus conjunction is perhaps going to be more prominent. Maybe it's going to be an easier day if you're in Australia or New Zealand. The moon will not be in the Via Combusta until late in the evening. So in Australasia, perhaps there's time to relax. Indeed, the Mercury-Mars conjunction, it's pretty exact, actually. You're not going to be able to escape the Mercury-Mars conjunction. So, yeah, overall, in Australasia, East Asia, try to focus on the Moon-Venus conjunction in Libra. It can be quite harmonious. It can bring people together, at least in a sort of a mental way. There are things to talk about, and it's a time when friendly conversation can work out, and perhaps it's not going to be so bad. Though wherever you are, it needn't be a bad day. It's just that you have to understand what is going on. If you expect everything to be just completely and totally harmonious all day long, you might be disappointed. And unless you're in Australia or New Zealand, where you get some breathing space. But in the end, that new moon must happen, and Mercury and Mars are making a conjunction. That just can't be avoided. And then turning to the heliocentric view, I don't think there's a lot going on heliocentrically. I mean, Mercury is making an opposition to Jupiter, and that Mercury opposition Jupiter, you could say, reinforces the message of Mercury conjunct Mars. Mercury conjunct Mars is quite an angry conjunction, and then you've got Mercury opposition Jupiter. There is a lot to say, and there's certainly a lot to say with Mercury conjunct Mars. So we might find ourselves talking a lot, feeling we have to talk a lot, we have to explain, we have to get people to understand. And so maybe that is the main aspect. Mars is sextile Pluto still, has been sextile Pluto for the last couple of days, so there is quite a lot of energy there, the kind of energy that we want to use to persuade, or who's doing the persuading. That is an important question. So let me now turn to the 12 signs. And when I do the 12 signs, my readings are probably going to be fairly concentrated. I mean, there's not a huge amount of fluff here. I mean, it really is all about that Mercury conjunct Mars, and so I'm thinking that might mean that some of my readings are shorter than usual. My readings have been shorter than usual, over the last week or so, because there hasn't been a huge amount going on. But I think that the pace is starting to quicken. We have got Neptune about to move into Aries. We've got a new moon tomorrow, so things are about to happen. But as far as today is concerned, maybe there is not a huge amount to report. Anyway, these are my forecasts for today, for the 12 signs, for Monday, October the 20th, 2025. Aries, you cannot avoid the fact that Mercury and Mars are conjunct one another. This conjunction has been building up for the last couple of days, and now it is exact. Well, if you are in California, this Mercury-Mars conjunction would have been exact late late on Sunday evening. But I mean, let's not split hairs. So, with Mercury-Mars, with this Mercury-Mars conjunction, there is a lot to say. You feel there's a lot to say, and as far as you're concerned, not everything is perfect. You have to consider your views. Even if you don't necessarily feel that you can always express your views, you're still annoyed. And if you don't express your views, then what's going to happen? Well, something is just going to build up, and it will keep building up. And what will happen in the end? Well, it could just explode. I mean, Aries is, or can be, quite an explosive sign. So, what are you going to do about it? Now, if you were to just say what you think, just without thinking about it, whatever's on your mind, it might still not be satisfactory. You maybe have to give it some thought. However urgent the situation is, the first thing that comes to mind may not be the best thing to say, and you need to think it through. And one reason for this is that Mars is making a quintile to Pluto. Mars is 72 degrees from Pluto, and Pluto is a fifth of the circle. And I'll be talking about these quintiles at the end of the video. But this quintile, I think, is a fortunate aspect. It allows you to harness your willpower, and that's what it's about. So before opening your mouth, before trying to get your way, really think it through, plan it. Don't do the first thing that comes to mind, because the first thing that comes to mind may not necessarily be the best thing. You could make mistakes, but if you're prepared to plan things, plan your initiatives, plan your words, write your script, maybe. If you can do that, and all the while thinking about how you can have maximum leverage, and you can have maximum leverage, you really can. You can get people to really pay attention to you. So if you can do that, then I think, in the end, you will find the right way of asserting yourself. But you also have to remember that we've got to run up to a new moon. New moon is tomorrow. This new moon is in Libra, and already the sun and the moon are in Libra. And so with these planets in Libra, of course Venus is in Libra as well, you do have to pay attention to who or what you are dealing with. It's not all about you. You've got to analyze the data. What is the data? It could just be the way you feel, what you pick up from other people, your vibes, what you learn, what you read about. Just really try to understand. And, if possible, Aries, try to put yourself in another person's shoes. It's something you can do. It's not always easy, but I think you definitely have the ability at the moment. And so, once you do that, you'll start to realize, what is possible and how to go about things. And additionally, Aries, Mars is quite close to true black moon Lilith, and Mars is in Scorpio, and this says a lot about you. And it could be Aries, that this is a time where you really want to look at things, really in a fair amount of depth. If you look at things at a surface level, I don't think that's going to be very satisfactory. And perhaps with Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith, you have to be aware of your own darkness, as well as other people's darkness. Sometimes people like to think everything is fine, that everything is all beautiful on the surface. There aren't any snakes in the grass, but there might well be. And so by being aware of your own unpleasantness, for example, jealousy, rage, anger, schadenfreude, enjoying other people's misfortune. Yeah, we don't like to admit to enjoying other people's misfortune, but let's be honest, we sometimes do. I mean, it's just human nature. We are born in sin, and we can't help it. And so, be aware of the darkness of your own personality. And if you're aware of the darkness of your own personality, your own unpleasantness, in a way that makes you a better person. In the same way that when you're dealing with other people, can you really trust someone if you don't see their darkness? If they seem to be just totally pleasant and nice on the surface, and they don't do anything wrong, they don't say anything wrong, they're always polite. In that kind of situation, one's alarm bells are ringing. It's like when you get these kind of people in public life. They don't do anything wrong, and everyone loves them. When everyone loves someone, you just know there's something wrong. So perhaps, Aries, you should be ready to look at things in a way that is complicated. I know I know as an Aries you like to keep things simple, but I think today is a day for just looking at the complications, perhaps reveling in the complications. I know it's not normally you, but just don't forget Mars is in Scorpio. Mercury and true black moon Lilith, the conjunct Mars. So it's a different approach for Aries, but I think it's an approach that best suits the current situation. Taurus, you would like to be independent. It would be great if you could make your own decisions, and you don't have to worry about what anyone's doing, and you can be a free spirit. But that really could be quite difficult. There is a lot of activity in Scorpio, your opposite sign. For example, Mercury is conjunct Mars, and Mars is a planet that often has a connection with relationships in a Taurean chart. And so Mercury conjunct Mars may be about how another person is responding to you, how they're reacting, what they're saying, what they're talking about. And you might notice people's words, and you might respond to them, or you might feel you have to respond to them. And as a result of this, there may be something about the day which is a bit provocative. Everything is trying to provoke you. And Taurians can be provoked. It's quite easy to make Taurians annoyed, and sometimes it might feel that everything is conspiring to drive you around the bend, wanting you to react. And it might be a situation, Taurus, where if you do react, then you might be weakening yourself. So in any situation where you're dealing with power, who has the power, who's trying to control who, if you respond, particularly in an angry way, it could backfire. And instead, Taurus, be aware of other people, be aware of their strengths. And in any competitive situation right now, I think it's kind of finely balanced, because Venus is in Libra, Mars is in Scorpio. So Venus and Mars are in their own signs. And with Venus and Mars in their own signs, you have your strengths, other people have their strengths. What are your strengths? Venus is in Libra. Your strength at the moment is being able to keep your cool, being able to stick to a plan, not doing anything to upset the apple cart. You might be tempted, you might want to say something, might want to express your anger, but as soon as you lose your cool, you lose your power. And so this might be a situation where you have to just refuse to be provoked. And I know that it's not good to keep your feelings to yourself, by and large. We're told we're supposed to express our feelings, we're supposed to be open, but that's not always the case. And I think that, as far as is possible, you need to keep cool, you need to keep calm, and through that calmness, you're able to maintain your strength, and you won't be showing your weaknesses. And what you can do, Taurus, you are able to have a long-term approach, perhaps more than other signs. You have a persistence to you, and where you win, Taurus, is your ability to see something through until the end. And other people just may not have that ability. They may be sidetracked, they may be expressing their anger or whatever, but you just keep going. You keep going, you keep smiling. You don't always get attention, doesn't matter. And if you can do that, then I think as you move towards the new moon, because remember we've got a new moon tomorrow, at 28 Libra. As you move towards that new moon, you just keep your cool, and in that way you can ride out the storm. Gemini, there's a lot of activity in Libra still. We've got Venus in Libra. We've got a new moon coming up in Libra, and this means that it can be a satisfying day. A day when you feel that you can, by and large, do what's important to you. You can sort of enjoy yourself, in your own way, and perhaps that's enough. But the question is, to what extent can you maintain the image? Can you keep going in this state? Because Mercury is making a conjunction to Mars, and so that's a different emphasis to the day. So in fact, there are two pressures. I don't say pressures. There are two ways of looking at today. We can look at today from a perspective of Libra, and we can look at today from a perspective of Scorpio. And these two planets have a very different impact on Gemini. The Libra side of things is about things just being easy, doing what you enjoy, not feeling pressured, not worrying too much about the future. And that certainly should be part of the day. But you have to keep your eyes open. At least you have to keep one eye open, because things are changing. Mercury is, like it or not, is making a conjunction to Mars. And however hard you try to be cool and calm and to live in the present and to enjoy yourself, however hard you try, it might not always be easy. And Mercury conjunct Mars can be about irritations, things irritating you that really shouldn't be irritating you. At least you don't think they should be irritating. You as a Gemini regard yourself as being above the mundane details of the everyday world. But it's nice to have that view. But to what extent can you maintain that impression? It could be hard. And I think with Mercury conjunct Mars, there's just a possibility that just certain things just annoy you. Things annoy you that you kind of know you shouldn't be annoyed about. Something small that you spend far too much time looking at. And I was walking the dog yesterday, and of course my son is in Gemini, and the dog just pulled on the leash, and there was this concrete bollard, and I scraped my thumb on this bollard, and it was just a minor thing, and I just spent I spent about 15 minutes looking at my thumb and just wondering, have I cut myself? And I don't think I cut myself, but I don't have this obsession about something. I know that's a completely trivial thing, but there may be other trivial things, maybe not quite as trivial as that, but things that you get bothered about, which you kind of feel are beneath you. And some of them may indeed be beneath you, but I think you do need to get a sense of proportion. And not every Gemini, but some Geminis can be a bit obsessive compulsive. I mean, I'm saying that, by the way, in a non-clinical way. I know it's a very common sort of phrase, and everyone has their obsessions, but your obsessions could come out into the open, or at least as far as you're concerned, and you might just spend a lot of time just worrying about something that you just know you shouldn't be worrying about. And additionally, there could be issues around health. When I say issues about health, I'm probably thinking about being overly concerned about your health. Something happening, you worrying, is it going to be bad? Have you poisoned yourself? Whatever. I mean, of course, you have got to watch out. You don't want to do anything that overtaxes you. And if you're careless with your health today, well, you could be sorry. I mean, Mercury-Mars, there's some danger that you overdo it health-wise. So do look at how you are behaving in a physical way. Don't take your health for granted. Don't do anything stupid. But again, as I've already said, don't be over concerned. And this Mercury-Mars conjunction in a Gemini chart, if you have animals, if you have pets, the size of a goat or lower. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because this Mercury-Mars conjunction is in Scorpio, and from Gemini, Scorpio is your 6th house. And in astrology, the 6th house represents small animals, smaller than a goat. So, for example, a horse is not ruled by the 6th house. A horse is ruled by the 12th house. So if you have pets, animals, whatever, with this Mercury-Mars conjunction, they may take up more attention than usual. Their health may be of concern. If you have a dog or a cat or a rabbit, make sure you look after your animal, and it might, for one reason or another, take up more of your time. So you can see, Gemini, that the day does have two aspects, and somehow you've got to get the balance right. You've got to think about your own creative needs. You've got to try and enjoy the day, but there are things that could interfere. Some of them are going to be just unnecessary interferences. There is a scope for obsessiveness, but you don't at the same time want to be careless. You want to get it right. And at the moment, Geminis are going to have a great sense of detail. I mean, an unusual sense of detail, because I don't think Gemini is in itself a particularly detailed sign, but your sense of detail might be sort of more than usual. And it's also possible that you might be quite unforgiving of other people's mistakes, as well as your own mistakes, and you're going to want to get things right. So, don't be too much of a perfectionist. Cancer. There is a fair amount going on today, but it's quite concentrated. If you've been watching the rest of this video, you'll know that I've been talking a lot about the Mercury-Mars conjunction. And, this Mercury-Mars conjunction, it's in Scorpio, and I think that it could have an impact on you. And I think it could actually have quite a positive impact if you handle it in the right way. This Mercury-Mars conjunction in Scorpio is for you about, you being very aware of what you can do, what you are capable of achieving. And you're able to explain yourself extremely well, with power, with conviction. People really are going to listen to you, and if you want to tell someone what's important to you, I think you can, but I don't think you have to tell anyone anything if you don't want to. If you want to just do things, your own way, you very much can. And so, what is it that you really enjoy, particularly on a sort of mental level? I mean, you might just enjoy brain games, just playing with ideas and playing with feelings as well. So this Mercury-Mars conjunction, which might be quite heavy for a lot of other people, I think for you, Cancer, I think you might quite enjoy it, and you might quite enjoy exploring, and also perhaps exploring things which other people don't really want to deal with. And this is because the Mercury-Mars conjunction is quite close to true Black Moon Lilith. So true Black Moon Lilith conjunct Mercury, conjunct Mars. It might represent the kind of things that you're interested in, and it could be quite dark, but I don't think you're going to mind. Scorpio, Cancerians quite often enjoy the less savoury side of life, provided they're not involved. They can perhaps look at it from afar and read about it, watch things about it, but provided they're not involved directly, that's fine. At the same time, we do have a run up to a new moon. Now, this new moon is tomorrow, and the moon and the sun and the moon are already in the same sign. The moon is in Libra, sun is in Libra, and in the run up to the new moon, it is the end of a lunar cycle. And Cancer, you are quite sensitive to the lunar cycles, and because of this, you're not going to really want to take on too much. And I think that you absolutely know your limits, and you're aware that you haven't got quite as much energy as you'd like to have. I mean, you've got enough energy. You've got enough energy to do what you need to do. You've got enough energy to enjoy yourself to some extent, but you haven't got all the energy in the world, and I don't think you've got enough energy to share it with other people. No, if you get involved with other people's problems, other people's issues, even trying to enjoy yourself with other people, it just could be quite exhausting. And besides, Cancer, it does feel as if you're getting ready for something. Something has come to an end, or it is coming to an end. And so you do want to conserve your resources, and it's probably not a time for experimentation. So, Cancer, if you know your limits, then I think that it can be a satisfactory day. And of course, you're getting ready for the new moon, and tomorrow in my horoscope for Tuesday, I'll be talking at length about the new moon and what it means for you. Leo, things could annoy you. It might be somewhat difficult to relax. I mean, you're not unusual in this sense. I mean, there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. Mercury and Mars, this conjunction has been building up for some time, and now it's here. In fact, if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska, then this conjunction would have actually happened last night, late on Sunday. But I mean, whether it's Sunday, Monday, it doesn't really matter. The point is, this Mercury-Mars conjunction is exact, and it's also conjunct true Black Moon Lilith. And this conjunction may say something about where your energies lie, and I think that your energies are going to be close to home. You could put a lot of energy into your home environment, and perhaps dealing with your family and whatever bothers your family, and that's good or it's bad. Is it good or is it? I mean, it could be both. I think it's a good time for sorting things out in in a domestic sense. So perhaps if you've been neglecting things about your own home, maybe things need to be repaired, or things need to be reorganized, or you need to make sure that you feel more secure in your own home, and perhaps certain details have just been on ice for rather too long. And so, Leo, you can, with great sort of vigor and conviction, really sort things out, and perhaps make yourself feel more secure. On the other hand, this Mercury-Mars conjunction could be too much of a good thing. You could put too much energy into your home, into the needs of your family, and your thought processes could go in this direction as well. So you're thinking about what needs to be done, other people's problems, and there may be no time for yourself, and also you could just get annoyed. Just all your anger could just go down, and there may not be a real way to really express this anger, because it's just building up, and there may not be a ready expression. And so that's one thing going on. And if you look at the structure of your chart right now, if we put Leo on the ascendant, you can see that a lot of planets are at the bottom of the chart. We've got Sun, Moon. We've got the Sun, Moon, and Venus at the bottom of the chart. Of course, we've got Mars and Mercury at the bottom of the chart. So a lot of your energies are going downwards. Now, part of this is seasonal. You think about it. You're a Leo, and so with all these planets at the bottom of the chart, this will tend to happen in the autumn. The Leo season, when the sun was in Leo, well, that was some time ago. That was a few months ago, and now things have gone down to the bottom of your chart. So that says something about where your energies lie, and just at the moment you possibly just haven't got the space or the inclination to be really thinking about the outside world, and feeling you can make an impression, and being a wild Leo extrovert. I don't think right now that is for you. And we do have a new moon coming up tomorrow, and this new moon is 28 Libra, and of course it involves the sun. And the Libra new moon can be about knowledge and how you are gathering knowledge, and so that could be something that Leos are doing. You're gaining a picture, and the facts are coming your way, and it's starting to clarify. And it's it perhaps has been particularly intense since the full moon. So we had a full moon on October the 7th. That I think that was October the 7th, right? Yeah. We had a full moon in Aries on October the 7th, and so perhaps that full moon was a time where you perhaps started to realize that you didn't know everything, but there were certainly gaps to fill. But now the information is coming your way, and you are in a position where you can make a decision, and having made a decision, you can start preparing yourself for something new. I mean, that's what the new moon at 28 Libra is all about, and that's something I'll be discussing in my horoscopes for tomorrow, Tuesday. Virgo, you might feel that there is quite a lot to say today, and the reason for that is that Mercury, your ruler, is conjunct Mars, and this conjunction to Mars, I would regard it as being an important aspect, especially for you, Virgo. So with Mercury conjunct Mars in a part of your horoscope which is actually fairly free flowing, is fairly communicative, I think it is a time, Virgo, when you do have a lot to say, a lot to talk about, and there's nothing trivial about your words. You know what is important. I mean, you should know what is important, and some things are so important that you might feel that it's worth making a fuss about them. If that means upsetting someone, breaking protocol, well, maybe that's just the way it is, and that can be Virgo. If Virgo does have an insensitive streak, particularly if something is important, if something needs to be pointed out. But it does matter that you're able to distinguish between maybe the sacred and the profane. By sacred, I mean the things that do matter, the things that are within the temple. The profane, not relevant. And so make that decision. Decide what matters. Decide what is worth taking a risk for. You don't know how anyone is going to respond. There is no point in losing a friendship because you want to talk about because you want to get annoyed about something trivial. You want to criticize someone for something that is just, in the grand scheme of things, is completely meaningless. However, there are key issues which require your attention and your time as well. And so do make that decision, and do be able to discriminate. And by discriminate, I mean make a decision about what's important and what is not important. So if you can discriminate, then Virgo, I think that you can be extremely effective, and you'll know what to say. And also, if something is important, really is important, no one's going to mind. People will understand your urgency. The one thing with this Mercury-Mars conjunction, be careful about traveling, particularly short distance traveling. Particularly if you're driving. Driving with this Mercury-Mars conjunction could be really annoying. I mean, it could be worse than annoying. If you're annoyed, then your ability to drive well could be negatively impacted. And so, only drive. Okay, you might have to drive, but only drive ideally if you're feeling cool, calm, and relaxed. Don't take your anger out on your car or on the road. And perhaps you should expect frustrations and delays if you're driving, if you're going from A to B. Not just driving, if you're going by bus, even something might happen if you're cycling. Well, make sure you've got some means of fixing a tire, for example, if you get a puncture. It's a long time since I've bicycled. I don't know why. I used to bicycle a lot, but I haven't really cycled since my late 20s. But anyway, short distance travel is just an area of some concern, and so don't travel unnecessarily. Perhaps you can leave it until tomorrow or next week or whenever. Unnecessary traveling is probably not to be advised, and just if there are delays, don't get annoyed. Try to anticipate delays. If you've got the internet, I presume you have got the internet. If you're looking at me, check on the travel conditions. And as far as other things are concerned, we've still got 3 planets in Libra. We've got the moon in Libra. We've got the moon starting to make a conjunction to the sun, and it's the end of a lunar cycle. And with the end of a lunar cycle, because we've got a new moon tomorrow, you're perhaps thinking about what still needs to be sorted out. And it could be, Virgo, that one thing that might need a bit of attention is money. Maybe there's something to do with money that needs to be dealt with. Now that could feed into the Mercury-Mars conjunction. I've said that some things are important and you need to talk about them. It could be there's something financial that needs to be talked about, and so that could be how the sun and the moon in Libra, are working. You kind of feel that something is not entirely right. it's bothering you, and perhaps this is a good time to sort it out, before the new moon tomorrow. Libra, we have got a run up to a new moon. So tomorrow, Tuesday, got a new moon, 28 degrees Libra. So you're already feeling the new moon, with the sun and the moon both being in your sign. And you might feel that this is a new beginning, or at least the beginning of a new beginning. And you have to kind of get your timing right. The new moon might be close, but it's not quite here. And when you think back to the Libra season, the sun is about to move into Scorpio. Later in the week, it happens. The sun moves. The sun is out of your sign. So when you look back at the last few weeks, what has been going on? What have you been able to achieve and accomplish? And perhaps it's now time to take stock of it all. Have you been successful? If you haven't been successful, what is there left to do? And perhaps this is fortunate. It's fortunate you've got a new moon. This new moon is in Libra, because you can, if necessary, contemplate a new start. So perhaps you haven't got things 100% right, you've made mistakes, you didn't get the full picture, in which case, that's fine. Don't beat yourself up about it, but don't be complacent. So perhaps you can start preparing for something new, and you certainly shouldn't think that you have in any way missed your moment, and just don't get too worked up about things. It's best to be today as objective as possible. Nothing is worth getting angry about. Nothing. And it doesn't matter what you hear, what you read, how other people are behaving, the thoughts you have, doesn't matter. The best approach to have right now, Libra, is to be just completely calm. And in that calm, something can happen. Something can kind of just click together, and it just clicks, and then everything is obvious. And if you can hit that moment of just everything being obvious, well, then everything else is easy. You know that you don't have to do anything until the right moment. And when that right moment arrives, I don't think it'll be today, I think it'll be sort of maybe tomorrow, maybe sort of a bit later in the week, it's all done. And it just then could be the case that if you are doing nothing, you are being quite constructive you're constructively doing nothing. You're doing nothing, at least in the outside world, because you just know that the timing is not right. And timing could be quite important. And I just don't think that today, regardless of how you feel, regardless of how much pressure there is, I don't think there is anything absolutely definite that has to be done. But you can't be complacent. It's not like you can think that you've got forever to wait. No, you haven't got forever to wait. And in fact, you have a pretty good idea of what kind of timescale you should be working on. Now, one pressure you might have is from other people, because Mercury is making a conjunction to Mars. This Mercury conjunct Mars, it doesn't affect you directly, but it could affect you indirectly, because you might be influenced by other people's behavior, and other people may not be particularly reasonable. This Mercury-Mars conjunction is in Scorpio, water sign, quite emotional. Some people are impatient, some people are annoyed, some people are just perhaps trying to push you in a particular direction. And you, Libra, should, if possible, just maybe ignore it, or just humor people. That humor has a role. You can say, "Fine, you're listening," but you don't have to do anything, and you certainly shouldn't be doing things just because you're being told, just because you feel you have to live up to another person's expectation. And additionally, this Mercury-Mars conjunction in Scorpio, could say something about money, and it might be the case that someone brings up the subject of money, and it's not something that you necessarily want to discuss. It just doesn't seem to be the right time. And sometimes when people talk about money, it's just not right. You kind of got it under control, and it just doesn't help if someone bothers you about money. You're not in the mood. Though, if another person is concerned about money, you've at least got to placate them. You've got to perhaps put them on hold. I mean, if you owe them money, don't ignore them. Just come up with a plan, tell them you will pay them at a certain stage. It may not be a person, it may be an organization, but money should not upset your equilibrium. But at the same time, if money comes up, it's an issue that you shouldn't ignore, but you can sort of work around it. And so, you're a Libra. I think you'll know what the best approach is. Scorpio. The big aspect, the headline aspect, is of course Mercury conjunct Mars. Now, if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska, this conjunction between Mercury and Mars, I think, takes place late on Sunday, but it doesn't matter. The point is, whether it's Sunday or Monday, this conjunction is exact. And I have been talking about it quite a lot. And, you are a Scorpio, and this Mercury-Mars conjunction takes place in Scorpio. And this means that you possibly have quite a lot to say. I mean, the Mercury-Mars conjunction, it's quite a verbal influence. It encourages you to say what's on your mind, to really talk, and there's certainly a lot that you need to talk about, or certainly a lot that you would like to talk about. And Scorpio, has a reputation for being quite silent, keeping its thoughts to itself, thoughts to themselves. I don't think that reputation, is necessarily true, but you may be inclined to keep things to yourself. It might seem easier, but you can't keep things to yourself forever. And with Mercury conjunct Mars, I think this is a great opportunity for saying what is important to you. But at the same time, you don't have to say everything. I mean, there's a lot ideally you'd like to talk about, you'd like to get out into the open, and it just may be enough to get 10% of it, 20% of it out. There's a lot you can hold back. And indeed, there's a lot that you should be holding back. So you certainly don't have to be, completely open about what is important. And additionally, Scorpio, there is room for planning, because there is an aspect. We have Mars quintile Pluto. So what we have is we've got this Mercury-Mars conjunction, and Pluto is quintiling this Mercury-Mars conjunction, making a 72-degree aspect. And I think that this quintile is quite useful. So this quintile, it is a 72-degree aspect. It's 1/5 of the circle. It's about planning. It can be about style. It can be about your willpower and how you exercise this will. And so if there's something that's important to you, and let's face it, you're a Scorpio, there's always something that's important to you, then work on it. You don't have to say everything. I've just said you only have to say 10% or 20% of what's on your mind. But there is work in terms of preparing the scene, preparing the stage, and that's perhaps what you need to do. And you can exercise your willpower. And Scorpio is a sign which is really about willpower. It's about desire. Yeah, desire. Things that you absolutely want. And you could say that Mars quintile Pluto is about deciding what you want and just giving it absolutely everything you've got, and perhaps being focused to the point of obsessiveness. I think that you can do this, very effectively. And if you can imagine it, then it can happen. It can really happen. It can happen in the real world. It doesn't have to happen today. And perhaps you're waiting for the sun to move into Scorpio. I mean, the sun is going to be in Scorpio in 3 days' time, maybe less. So in a couple of days, sun will move into Scorpio, the moon will be in Scorpio, and that might be your moment where whatever you're working on can really become real. And Scorpio, as far as relationships are concerned, don't underestimate yourself. You are a powerful person, and perhaps you can be too much of a good thing. You have to consider what impact you can have. You can have a major impact on the people around you, and it may be that you have to tone things down right now. And and don't forget, with that Mercury conjunct Mars, if you start criticizing anyone, then you can be really intense. You have the capacity to make someone feel really bad if you use the right words, the wrong words, kind of depends how you see it. So ask yourself, what kind of effect do you really want to have? And you don't want to be too excessive. But sometimes you're a Scorpio, excessiveness is necessary. Sagittarius, there's room for subtlety. Don't take things at face value. Just because something isn't obvious doesn't mean that it's not important. And as far as other people are concerned, really do make an effort to read between the lines. People might be signaling things to you that at first you're just not aware of. It's not loud enough, and so you might ignore it. But things are going on beneath the surface. So it kind of depends on your situation. But if other people do matter, if there are people around you, all the time, you do have to pay attention to what they're doing, to what they are signaling, and you have to perhaps assume that there is a great depth there. Okay, you might have assumed wrong, but other people can be complicated, and they might keep things to themselves, and they might even assume that you're able to pick up on their feelings. And if you're not picking up on their feelings, well, that could create a difficult situation. So treat everyone as a whole individual and try to be aware of the past. So if you have connections, with another person, think about your relationship with them, as a whole. Go back years. Ask yourself, when did that relationship start? How has that relationship developed? How might you have offended them in the past? Maybe they're not as forgiving as you had thought they were. So if you take this cautious approach, Sagittarius, I think that you will be preparing yourself. And I think that it's quite possible that nothing happens, that there is nothing to worry about. But with astrology, what I'm trying to do is perhaps look at things from the worst possible case, and if that doesn't show up, well, that's fine. But don't underestimate this concept of secrecy, because it could be important, and you shouldn't. Don't underestimate people. And also, looking at your social life and everyone around you, don't assume that things are necessarily going to go to plan. They might not. For a start, we've got the moon in the Virgo-combustor. The moon goes into the Virgo-combustor today. If you're in the Americas, the moon will have gone into the Virgo-combustor, very early in the morning. If you're in Europe, a bit later in the day. So with the Virgo-combustor, moon in the Virgo-combustor, moon in Libra in the Virgo-combustor, that indicates that your relations with other people will not necessarily go to plan, and things could just happen which which have a social impact. Now, that might not necessarily be bad, and there is always a possibility of surprises, and perhaps surprises to the upside. Someone might appear, you weren't expecting them to appear. They might do something nice that you weren't expecting. Or you might just get to know someone and you didn't think you had anything in common with them, but actually you're dealing with someone who you have, you do have plenty of common ground. So other people are probably where the focus is. And of course, don't forget that Uranus is still in Gemini, in your opposite sign. It's going retrograde, and soon enough it will go back into Taurus. But it is a time when you absolutely mustn't make assumptions. And if you're ready for anything, you assume the worst. If you assume that other people are complicated, and you make allowances for this, and you temper your language. I think it's important to use sort of reasonable language and not to be provocative, not to be controversial. I know you're a Sagittarius. Sometimes you like to be controversial. Sometimes you like to state the truth, the blunt truth, not caring how other people are going to respond. But as I said at the beginning, I think it's a day when subtlety is important. Capricorn, we have a build-up to a new moon in Libra. And so tomorrow we've got this new moon, but the new moon is kind of with us already because the sun is in Libra, the moon is in Libra, and this does mean that you are thinking about yourself and your priorities, and you might feel that you're missing something, that time is passing you by. You perhaps are of the view that you had an opportunity, but you missed the opportunity, or you didn't take advantage of it as well as you should have done. Well, I don't think you need to be concerned. I think that this new moon gives you another chance. This new moon, happening in very late Libra, a new moon taking place in a major sector of your horoscope, in a cardinal sign, indeed in the highest part of your chart. And so now is perhaps a time to be preparing yourself, as one lunar cycle comes to an end, as you prepare for the new moon, as you get ready for tomorrow's new moon. You absolutely shouldn't give up on things, assume that you've missed your moment, because you haven't missed your moment at all. It's all perhaps been about preparation over the last nearly a month almost, where you perhaps had to learn new things, put them into practice, or start putting them into practice, and there might have been quite a lot of trial and error. But now things are starting to make sense, and don't forget that Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn. Venus in Libra is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn. This mutual reception by exaltation will continue into November, at least until early November. So to think that it's too late, that is simply not the case. And additionally, Capricorn, you're going to be very good at expressing your needs and your desires. You have a strong sense of what needs to be done and what needs to be said. And if you start talking, then immediately you'll be able to get people's attention, and you're going to give the impression of someone who really is quite powerful, I think mainly on a sort of verbal and a mental level. You give the impression that you've made a decision and you're ready to see it through, even if you haven't made a decision. You're someone who is not to be ignored, and you're someone who insists on getting their way. So Capricorn, it's important that you don't spend too much time on the fence. This is not a time for sitting on the fence. It's a time for being very clear about what you want, and communicating this in simple, straightforward language that everyone can understand. And you don't have to use many words. Perhaps you don't even have to use any words at all. Just your plain willpower may be enough. And maybe things like your body language, your posture, the sort of the vibes that you're giving off. It just gives the impression, Capricorn, that you are a serious person. And so that can really see you through. And if things happen today that you weren't necessarily expecting, don't worry about it. You have the strength of personality to just be able to, see it through to a satisfactory conclusion. So it's not the end, Capricorn. It's the beginning, and I think you'll really see that with tomorrow's new moon, which I'll be discussing in my horoscopes for Tuesday. Aquarius. Some people are responding to the Mercury-Mars conjunction in a very positive way. Other people are finding it a problem. I mean, it is a powerful aspect, and it's quite a dangerous aspect. Mercury conjunct Mars can represent people being impatient, angry, getting annoyed about things, making mistakes. Yeah, it's not necessarily good. But as far as you're concerned, I think that this Mercury-Mars conjunction can be very useful. It really gives you the ability to project your personality and also, your desires. There are things you want. There are things you want to achieve, Aquarius, and you make it clear that they are important to you. And this has perhaps been the case ever since Mars moved into Scorpio. Mars is an assertive planet in Scorpio, in its own sign, in a high-profile sector of your chart. So with Mars in Scorpio conjunct Mercury is really triggering Mars. I mean, in a good sense, not triggering in a bad sense. So now is the time, Aquarius, to really push yourself. So if there's something you want, then make sure you do everything you can to get it, and don't, in the process, don't be too worried about your reputation or what people think about you. Mercury and Mars are conjunct true black moon Lilith, and this true black moon Lilith could be seen as being about your desires and also perhaps your unpleasantness. We're all unpleasant at some level, aren't we? And if you want to get what you want, it may be that someone else is a loser, someone else loses out, and there may be a competitive aspect to it, and that's not nice. But maybe with Mercury conjunct Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith, for you, that's okay right now. So don't worry too much about the morality of the situation. Okay, you should worry to some extent, but you don't want to be squeamish. This is the world we live in. There are going to be winners and losers, and if you're an ambitious Aquarius, perhaps you have to, do whatever it takes, provided it's legal and relatively moral. So, Aquarius, don't hold back, but at the same time, be open to new ideas and new possibilities. I don't think it is the case that there is only one way of achieving your goals. There could be several ways, and you need to be open to that. Especially as we've got the build up to a new moon in Libra. This new moon in Libra, is perhaps creating the opportunity of discovering new possibilities and realizing that maybe you've been too narrow-minded in certain areas, and if you looked at things in a different way, you would see other possibilities. And while you're at it, it's not just you on the stage. There are other people, and it does seem that you're not the only ambitious one. Someone else, perhaps quite close to you, really wants things to be better. they have a strong need for self-improvement. Now, that might say something about relationships. So as far as relationships are concerned, consider what the other person wants and what they might feel is lacking. It's easy to think that we're the only ones that have priorities. Of course, everyone has priorities, and it's just possible that someone close to you is dissatisfied. They want things to be better. They want things to be better in their own life, and they therefore expect to be supported in whatever their goals are. So think about not just your own ambition structure, but other people's ambition structure, regardless of what the relationship is. And so perhaps in terms of your own selfishness, you can create a situation where you can be selfish not just for you, but also for someone else. Perhaps you can align your interests with another person's interests. Perhaps you can appeal to another person's selfishness and get them to realize that, if you're successful, if you're improving your position and your status, they can improve things as well. So, don't be narrow-minded, and always think about the social and interpersonal dimension. Pisces. There is at the moment a conjunction between Mercury and Mars, which I've been going on and on about. And this conjunction is not directly important to you, but it could say something about other people. I mean, Mercury is ruler of Virgo, and Virgo is, of course, your opposite sign. So we could imagine a Mercury-Mars conjunction as being about someone else, perhaps someone close to you, who is annoyed about something, or someone who is very energetic. They want action, they want results. So, bear that in mind. What kind of pressure is being put on you? And how do you respond to this pressure? And so, Pisces, I think you need to make a real effort to, understand, what other people want, what their priorities might be, and ask yourself, to what extent do you want to oblige? Now, some people, I think, are going to just be pushy. They're going to want results. They're going to just want you to do things their way, and they might be completely unreasonable, in which case you need to hold firm. And that is a message that I've been repeating for almost day in, day out when talking about the Pisces horoscope. It's quite a persistent situation here for Pisces, that you have to look after your own interest. However, there are times when you need to understand what other people want and understand why people might be impatient. And in the process, you might be able to learn something. It could be, Pisces, for example, that you have been a little bit too repetitive. You've done things in the same old way, and it might have been effective up to a point. It may have been fine for you, but it may not have been fine for another person. It could be that someone is getting tired with your particular approach. And it could be that they've got a point. So if someone seems agitated and annoyed, try to find out what's going on. If possible, get someone to be completely open. And it may be that you've done something not wrong, but you just haven't applied yourself as much as you should have done, or you could have just been lazy, just doing things in the same old way, and that just wasn't satisfactory, and it was making other people agitated as well. So maybe you can learn from other people's agitation, and if you find that anyone is angry and is talking a lot, do listen. I think it is a time, Pisces, when you can very much learn from another person's annoyance, and it's therefore important that you don't take anything to heart, that you don't make things too personal. You instead you watch, you observe, and perhaps you respond. And you can respond by placating other people, maybe, provided you're not giving anything away. And I don't think you do have to give anything away. In fact, I think in certain situations you can gain from other people's agitation. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 21, which is biting through. I think we had this hexagram quite recently, and this hexagram biting through is about punishment. We have to respond to someone else's excesses, or perhaps we have to respond to our own excesses. I mean, that's certainly possible, and it's important not to go too far. And when I talk about punishment, it's a word that doesn't seem particularly appropriate, unless we're involved in the law, or we're police officers, or the judiciary, judges, lawyers, whatever. But in terms of everyday life, it's perhaps about moderating ourselves and moderating other people. And when you're talking about biting through, there is this concept of making something better. If someone has a fault, we can deal with it. The idea with biting through, you have perhaps a piece of gold which is surrounded by tough leather, and so in that kind of situation you've got to get through the leather to find the gold in another person's personality. So even if they are committing crimes, doing bad stuff, that doesn't mean that they are beyond hope. Now, as far as this particular hexagram is concerned, we have two moving lines. The bottom line moves, and the third from the bottom line moves. And what the bottom line is about someone who is doing something wrong, but they're kind of like a first-time offender. And that person doing something wrong may be us. We're starting to make a mistake. Or we may notice that someone else is starting to make a mistake. And we do have to remember astrologically that there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. And you could say that the Mercury conjunct Mars is very much in accord with biting through, because you can see how Mercury conjunct Mars in Scorpio could be the punisher, particularly the punisher with words, with harsh words. I mean, that's how ordinary people punish each other, isn't it? I mean, in families, and when people are together, they punish people with words. I mean, that's what people generally use. They criticize them, they shout at them. I mean, of course, it depends on the situation. This is what road rage is about. And by the way, road rage, I didn't say that. Mercury conjunct Mars could be about road rage. That's one way of looking at it. But yeah, people use words to punish each other, and it's very important that we use the right words if necessary. And we can use words with ourselves. And so it could be we have a situation where we're starting to make a mistake and we get criticized, or someone else is starting to make a mistake and we criticize them, or we just criticize ourselves. And one way of looking at this bottom line is to think about it in terms of restriction. We get restricted. We were thinking about doing something, and okay, we might get restricted by criticism. We might get restricted by just external circumstances happening, and it stops us. We're stopped from doing what we want to do, and that's a good thing, because we were planning on doing something that wasn't advisable, and so that is fortunate. So if we're tempted to do something stupid, it just may be that fate intervenes and just creates obstacles. And so if you do find that today is difficult, that you can't get anything done, maybe that's a good thing, because perhaps you were being prevented from making a larger mistake. Then the third line from the bottom moves, and the third line from the bottom is about irritation. We try to deal with something and we just get damaged, and perhaps we try to move forward. We ignore advice, but we move forward. We try something out and it doesn't work. Or, we just biting through. We bite into something which isn't very nice. And, the I Ching talks about something which is mildly poisonous. It's not going to kill us. I think I had this line quite recently. So there's a bad taste in our mouth, and perhaps because of our bad taste in our mouth, we stop. And it's kind of maybe like batteries. Did you know that batteries, those sort of button batteries, they put something on it which is bitter because they're afraid that children might eat these button batteries. And maybe that's what it's like, or like with sort of cleaning fluid or whatever, they put something that tastes really bad in it to make sure that children or anyone else doesn't eat it or drink it. And so maybe this is what the third line is all about. We get into something, we start trying something, and mildly poisonous. It's bitter. It has a burning sensation in our mouth, and we spit it out, and we don't poison ourselves. So that might be a way in which the third line moves. Of course, I think I had this third line about a week ago, and I did warn of mild food poisoning. So I suppose I would repeat that warning. But but maybe it's punishment. Of course, it was punishment. I think my mother said before was saying as a child, she was punished by literally having her mouth washed out with soap. I mean, that's what they did. And so again, that's a form of punishment. But it's not a serious punishment. It's not punishment. It doesn't cause us any permanent damage. But perhaps because something has got a bad taste, that encourages us to stop what we're doing. Now we've got two moving lines, and that means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 56, which is the Wanderer. And the Wanderer perhaps indicates that we have tried something out. We thought we had understood something. We were feeling quite confident, but then we realized it didn't work. And that perhaps relates to the previous hexagram. We were trying to get something together, then we had to stop. And then the Wanderer means we're kind of back to the drawing board. And that might be how it feels at the end of the day. We're not quite sure where we're going. We're not quite sure what the solution is. And we're left with questions. And that might be just how the day ends. You tried something, it didn't work. And that's okay. It didn't work. And now, as a wanderer, not having anywhere to go, not having any roots. When I say not having anywhere to go, not having any roots, I think I'm largely thinking about in relationship to a particular issue that you're having to deal with at the moment. And so the challenge now is to think about, what you're going to do next. How are you going to find a solution? And perhaps the solution will be provided tomorrow, Tuesday. Remember, this is the end of a lunar cycle. So it's kind of appropriate at the end of a lunar cycle. We've got this hexagram, the Wanderer, just not sure where it's going, because it's the end. And soon enough, there'll be a new moon. I think there's a new moon on Tuesday, and that might provide us a focus that we haven't really got today. And having done the I Ching, I want to look at the conjunction between Mercury and Mars. So today there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars, and here is the chart for the conjunction. So this conjunction takes place at 7:52 a.m. London time. So that means that if you're on in California, British Columbia, whatever, it will be at 11:52 p.m. late on Monday, sort of earlier in Hawaii or Alaska. So here's the exact conjunction. It takes place at 19 degrees 11 minutes Scorpio. And I think that 19 degrees Scorpio is often seen as a rather difficult degree, 19 Scorpio. I haven't sort of looked at this degree for some time, but it's seen as, I believe, off the top of my head, as being quite an unlucky degree, 19 Scorpio. And it may just indicate that this Mercury-Mars conjunction is, more difficult than expected, and people getting upset about unpleasant things, especially as this conjunction is right on true Black Moon Lilith. True Black Moon Lilith at 1723 Scorpio. By the way, I never use mean Black Moon Lilith. Mean Black Moon Lilith can be somewhere completely different. I mean, not completely different, but it can be many degrees off true Black Moon Lilith. But so I use true Black Moon Lilith. So true Black Moon Lilith conjunct Mercury and Mars does indicate the darkness, perhaps, and maybe the intensity of this Mercury-Mars conjunction. There are things that some of us are really thinking about, we're getting really deeply into. And this Mercury-Mars conjunction, well, how's it going to manifest? Well, I've already said at the beginning and throughout this video, it's verbal. It's about talking. It's about what do we want to talk about. We want to talk about everything that makes us annoyed. And it can be very agitated, and it may also say something about our thought processes. And this Mercury-Mars conjunction is very linked up with Pluto, because Pluto is making a 72-degree aspect to it. It's 1/5 of a circle away from the Mercury-Mars conjunction. And so Pluto is about power and people using words to try to get their way. And it's an aspect that one can very much think about in terms of propaganda. We want to create an effect, and we want to be taken seriously, at least from our perspective. And it could just be about other people, other organizations, trying to get us to do things their way. So if you want to see this Mercury-Pluto, if you want to see the fiveness of this aspect, so here's the Mercury conjunct Mars, let's set up the fifth harmonic. So the fifth harmonic, by the way, is we take all the planets, we reduce them to absolute longitude, i.e. absolute longitude means if you've got a planet at 0 degrees, Aries, you just say it's 0. If you've got a planet at 29 Pisces, you say it's 359. If it's at 0 degrees Aquarius, you say it's at 300. You take the absolute longitude, you multiply by 5, and you keep subtracting 360 until you've got a number below 360, and then you convert it back to the zodiac. And so if we look at the fifth harmonic of this chart, you will perhaps see what I mean. So there is the fifth harmonic, and you can see that Mercury and Mars and Pluto are conjunct. So it really does have a real Pluto feel to it, this conjunction. And I think that Pluto is largely about persuasion, suddenly being able to persuade, and it might catch us unawares. So we can be incredibly persuasive. If you want to be persuasive, you feel that now is the time to get someone to believe in what you believe in. Yeah, you can do it. And at the same time, other people are going to be very persuasive. And so there is perhaps a battle for ideas, which we shouldn't really underestimate. As an example of the quintile, I like to give an example. And if you've been watching these videos, every day for the last year, you'll probably be familiar with this example. But the example I like to use to show the power of quintiles is that of Adolf Hitler's first political speech. So let me just switch back. So in 1919, when Hitler was working for the German army as an agent, just as a spy, well, I don't know if he was a spy, he was gathering intelligence. He visited this meeting of a political party, the National Socialist Party, which he didn't have any connection with at the time. And he just sat there. He was there as an agent. He was there to be objective, to just see what was going on. And I think that there was someone suggesting that Bavaria should split off from Germany. And Hitler just couldn't help himself. This was just so upsetting to him that he just had to make a speech. And he made this speech, and everyone thought it was wonderful. And he, as a result of his speech, he joined the party and he took over the party. So this was a speech that launched his political career. And here is the approximate chart of his speech. I don't know precisely what time. I know it was on October the 16th, 1919. And I mean, I don't know, 7 p.m. I'm in Munich. I've just gone for an evening meeting. I'm not saying that the ascendant is correct. But if you look at the transit that Hitler had, the key transit that Hitler had was to his Mercury. So here's his Mercury at 25 degrees 40 Aries, and Pluto was at 7 degrees 46 Cancer. So Pluto was exactly 72 degrees with about 6 arc minutes orb from his Mercury. And so this was the moment when he made his speech. And you can see with Pluto, Mercury, the will to make a speech. And so I think that kind of fits really well. Also, Pluto is opposition his moon was opposition his moon Jupiter midpoint. And so I think that seems to me to be, pretty clear, pretty good example of astrology working. And so I always urge with quintiles, don't underestimate them. Even sort of quintile transits, one should perhaps use quintile transits. And there can be moments when we really have something to say. So, going back to the Mercury-Mars conjunction, the fact that it is quintile Pluto really does tell us about the kind of influence, that it can bring to bear. Now, as far as who might be influenced by this? I mean, who might be affected by this? Well, I'm not saying I'm going to come up with anything dramatic. I noticed that the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, he has his Venus at 19 Scorpio. So the Mercury-Mars conjunction will be right on his Venus. That might say something about his private life, but it might say something. Venus might be about how he functions as president. What he does, the kind of pressures he's under, and it might be that he has to say something, or perhaps make a speech. Or then we've got Lula, the president of Brazil. Lula has his Mercury at 19 Scorpio. So with this Mercury-Mars conjunction on his Mercury, again, it might say something about what he has to say, how he expresses himself, particularly as Pluto is involved. So I don't know what Lula's doing. I don't really follow Brazilian politics, but he may feel that he has to make an impression, that he has to say something. And going to Mexico, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, has her Mars at 19 degrees Taurus. So this Mercury-Mars conjunction is opposition her Mars. So when you've got two planets coming together, Mercury and Mars, they are inner planets. So Mercury and Mars as inner planets, their transits in themselves are not particularly significant, but when they come together and make a conjunction, it can be like an outer planet. So Claudia Sheinbaum having a Mercury-Mars conjunction opposition her Mars may say something about the opposition she has to deal with. I don't have her time of birth, but Mars may suggest the men in her life, male politicians, or it could just be about aggravating circumstances. And it's not just people, but we need to think about it. It's also events and organizations. And one organization we might want to think about is the Starmer government. So when Keir Starmer came to power. So Keir Starmer came to power, he became Prime Minister on July the 5th, 2024. And so at the time of him coming to power, Mars was at 19 degrees and 10 minutes Taurus. So if we compare the Starmer regime with the Mercury-Mars conjunction, this Mercury-Mars conjunction is at 1911 Scorpio. The Starmer Prime Minister regime Mars is at 1910 Taurus. So I'm thinking that this Mercury-Mars conjunction could have quite a huge and negative impact on the government. I mean, there is scandal after scandal. I mean, the latest scandal relates to some Chinese spying scandal. The government made a decision not to prosecute some Chinese spies, and that has made a lot of people really annoyed. I'm sure I've simplified the thing completely, but there is scandal after scandal, and there could just be something relating to the British government that is really impacted by this Mercury-Mars conjunction. And finally, I just want to quickly look at a few things that happened, a few events that happened when Mercury was conjunct Mars. The German political party, the AfD, the right-wing party, which I think is, in terms of the opinion polls, is now the most popular party in Germany. The AfD was founded on February 6, 2013. And at the time of the AfD's foundation, there was a Mercury-Mars conjunction. So you can see, right-wing party, annoyed, lots to complain about. And so that says something about the party. And its leader, Alice Weidel, she likewise, she was also born on February the 6th, so she shares a birthday with the party she leads. And Alice Weidel has a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Aquarius. So it's like a person with Mercury-Mars conjunction is attracted to an organization which also has a Mercury-Mars conjunction. Now, Mercury-Mars can be about communication. It can be about writing. And if you have any interest in Aleister Crowley, you will know about the Book of the Law. So the Book of the Law, he started to compose this book on April the 8th, 1904 at noon in Cairo. And at the time of this, when he started, there was an exact Mercury-Mars conjunction. Now, I don't know whether that was a coincidence. You have to remember that Aleister Crowley knew about astrology. So it's possible that he considered astrology when he started writing this book. And the aim of this book was to start a religion almost. But the book is quite harsh. I mean, it's difficult to start a religion with the Book of the Law. I mean, I haven't looked through it for some time, but it has some quite violent imagery. And of course, the fundamental message of Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law is do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Mercury-Mars in Taurus, very, very close, 3-minute orb. You do what you want. Mercury-Mars in Taurus, that's a fixed sign. Very, very, very stubborn there. But it might be that if you want to start writing a book, doing it when Mercury is making an exact conjunction to Mars might be such a good idea. Might be a good idea. But you have to be careful, perhaps, of having imagery which is too violent, because it's a very popular book amongst people in the occult. It's much talked about, but as a mainstream religion founded on the Book of Law, I don't think so. I think that's going to be quite difficult. And turning to the United States, the Boston Tea Party. This is when, I forget the details, but the British imported tea, which, I don't know, there was some issue about taxation. It wasn't taxed as highly as the tea, but the US merchants were making money off, so and it was seen as a precursor to the American Revolution. And this is a chart of the Boston Tea Party, when American colonists, they boarded a British ship and they threw all the tea into Boston Harbor, and this took place when Mercury was conjunct Mars. So Mercury conjunct Mars can be about agitation, feeling you have to do something. It is necessary to act. So Mercury is not necessarily just about words. It can be about what you actually do. And when you've got Mercury Mars, you might have big plans. For example, knocking Turkey out of the war early, like the beginning of Gallipoli, when the British, or I think it was Churchill's great idea to attack Gallipoli and knock Turkey out of the First World War early. And of course, a lot of Australians and New Zealanders were involved in Gallipoli, and a lot of them were killed. And this Gallipoli took place at the time of a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Taurus. So it's a hostile action. It's not just about thought, but it was an action that didn't work out, and a lot of people were killed, and it was a disaster. And short term, it was very damaging to Winston Churchill's political career. And Mercury conjunct Mars can be about disasters. I mean, there is evidence of that. The worst sinking ever, the worst shipping disaster ever took place with the Mercury-Mars conjunction, with the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. Up to 10,000 people were killed. So this was when a Russian submarine torpedoed the German ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was, just as a finish at the end of the war. It was trying to get people out of East Prussia, taking them to the main mass of Germany. And so this is a chart for the sinking of Wilhelm Gustloff. There is the Mercury-Mars conjunction. We have Mars on the south node with Mercury there as well. And another huge disaster where I think about 10,000 people were killed. So wartime disasters, loads of people dying, was the Messine mine on June the 7th, 1917, when a tunnel was built under the German lines, and it was packed with explosives, I think, by the British and their other allied troops. They packed explosives under the German lines and blew it up, I think at 3:10 in the morning in Ypres in Belgium, and I think up to 10,000 people 10,000 German troops were killed. And so here, an exact Mercury-Mars conjunction, also an exact conjunction with Mars and Jupiter. So you could say that you had the Mars-Jupiter conjunction, talking about the death and the disaster of it all, and then Mercury is also involved. So still, it's a Mercury-Mars conjunction, and I think that perhaps with Mercury-Mars conjunctions, we do have to be careful. And another disaster in New Zealand, I don't know the details. I think it was a coal mining disaster in Pike River. I don't know the details. A lot of people were killed in this disaster on November the 19th, 2010. And again, you've got Mercury-Mars conjunction in, I think it was in a coal mine. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a Mercury-Mars conjunction at the time. Now, Mercury-Mars can encourage people to be ironic, and here's a horoscope for Margaret Thatcher becoming Prime Minister. I mean, I've gone for sort of 11 a.m. on May the 4th, 1979, and so she became Prime Minister with a Mercury-Mars conjunction. And I think that this might say something about Margaret Thatcher's regime, that she was quite verbal and she was quite aggressive, verbally aggressive. Mercury-Mars in Aries. She was not into compromise. Her speeches were very strident, And the irony comes in what she said when she became Prime Minister. So what she said when she was Prime Minister, she said, and I would just like to remember some words of St. Francis of Assisi, which I think are really just particularly apt at the moment. Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope. And I'm particularly thinking of where there is discord, may we bring harmony. I think this is actually the absolute opposite of what Margaret Thatcher actually did. There was an irony there. And I think that it's kind of, to say, where there is harmony, may we bring where there is discord, may we bring harmony, is really the opposite of what Mercury conjunct Mars really is. Because, in the end, Margaret Thatcher's regime brought incredible discord to Britain and really, in some respects, destroyed, Britain's fabric. She was into having a fight, and she got away with it, sort of short term. But I think that her regime really does illustrate the Mercury-Mars conjunction in Aries. So those are a few thoughts on the Mercury-Mars conjunction. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like. I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.